Welcome to the Foil Pod with me, Roo Chater. Hi there. If you're just tuning in, Foil Pod is a new podcast from Tonic Magazine, the team that bring you that amazing foiling magazine that I'm sure you've all seen. We feature all kinds of foiling in the mag. We've got a website, social media channels, YouTube as well, with technique from Christian and Kareen, video reviews, all sorts of content. So if you're listening to this podcast and you haven't checked out some of the other stuff that we do, get yourself over to tonicmag.com and have a look there. Quick thank you to our diamond sponsors that support us at Tonic Mag, which make this podcast possible, and that is Cabrina, Armstrong, Core, and Ozone. Thank you to those guys. This podcast is basically a way for us to get a little bit more content out to you. We're also using the podcast interviews to generate content for the magazine, so it kind of works hand in hand, which is a great way to produce things. We're often interviewing people, so why not put it in a podcast format and get you the content that you like in whichever way you want to engage with it. This first episode is with Connor Bainbridge. He's a bit of a legend. He's an Olympian who did incredibly well at the Paris 2024 Olympics, although, as you'll hear from this podcast, he was pretty disappointed as he was fully expecting to podium, considering he spent most of his career on the podium and did really well in the kite racing scene. He's now switched pretty much purely to wing foiling and designs all of the wings for Ozone, or has started to design all of the wings for Ozone and look after that side of things over there. And we talk a little bit about his transition from being a kite foil racer to getting involved with Ozone and product design, and now that he's retired from racing, what he's going to be doing moving forwards. It's a really good episode. He's a lovely guy. I'm sure you're going to enjoy it. If you do like the podcast, please give us a like, share, subscribe. Make sure you tell your friends about it and spread the word, because obviously the more people that listen to it, the better it is. Anyway, without any more chat from me, let's get into this episode. Today, I am sat down with Connor Bainbridge. He's a bit of a legend in the water sports world and has had a very interesting career, which I think you will enjoy listening to. We're going to get into that in a few moments, but he's an Olympian and was at Paris 2024 Games, so we're going to talk a little bit about that. And currently, he's now working for Ozone, designing all of their wings and looking after that program there. He's out in Mauritius at the moment, so he's wearing a t-shirt whilst I'm in the UK in a body warmer because it's rather cold this morning in England. But Connor, how are you doing this morning? You good?
Yeah, really good. Thank you. Really good. Thanks for having me on.
Excellent. So one of my first questions I like to ask people is how they got into the water sports, scene, as it were. What was your first introduction to water sports?
Yeah, I mean, I think my first into any kind of wind water sports was my dad used to windsurf when he lived in France, when in his 20s, and then when we moved back to the UK, he kind of got back into windsurfing. So I think my first kind of experience on a windsurfing board was probably when I was 7 or 8 years old, up
Yeah.
in a reservoir up in West Yorkshire. And that's kind of where my whole windsurfing career kicked off, was tiny little reservoir, trying to convince my parents to drive me up after school every single day. And then from there on, it kind of just bloomed. And I was, absolutely loved windsurfing for so many years. And, it's a show. I hardly windsurf anymore at all, but yeah, that's kind of where it all kicked off. Tiny little reservoir in the hills of West Yorkshire.
And then you ended up on the British sailing team for windsurfing as well, didn't you? That must have been quite a stretch from a small reservoir to end up on the British sailing team as part of the windsurfing crew. How did you sort of progress to that?
Yeah, I mean, oddly enough, when I first started windsurfing, I hated the racing. It was my dad's absolute bane of his existence to try and get me to actually use my race gear. I would spend my whole time on my freestyle gear, trying desperately to avoid the fact that I was going to go racing. And then in 2006, I think it was, he dragged me down to Weymouth for my first kind of big major regatta. And as it happens, it was blowing 25 knots and we did slalom. And it ends up that I won the event, and that's kind of where it all kind of sparked off of the competitive racing kind of drive. And yeah, from there, kind of, I was just kind of on the RYA's kind of treadmill, if you like, into the British sailing team. I did zone squad, into youth squad, and then transitioned into the transitional British sailing team, and then eventually the British sailing team. So yeah, I was kind of on that treadmill from, I think, my first international event, I was 13 or 14, and then I finished, and then I finished professional windsurfing or competitive windsurfing when I was 21. So yeah, it was relatively short-lived in terms of like I think I was 4 years on the British sailing team. But I was really young. I mean, I think I got onto the British sailing team when I was 16.
Yeah.
And so I was kind of officially a paid athlete, if you like, from when I was 16. Yeah, and I've obviously been involved in the system in some aspect ever since.
Yeah. Was that based down in Weymouth when you joined the British sailing team? You having to live down there and away from your parents at a young age? Was that the crack, or did they move down as well?
Yeah, so I mean, everything was kind of based in Weymouth, obviously around ramping up into the 2012 Olympics. So um, yeah, I mean, I'd spend the summers down there. So I was living in West Yorkshire, and then my dad would park up the camper van, and we'd live out of the camper van in Weymouth through the summers. Um, and then when I was 17 and could drive, I actually moved to Exeter and lived with my grandma, and finished my school down in Exeter, so that I could be closer to Weymouth for the kind of those critical kind of 2 years of transitioning into the senior class. But yeah, everything was Weymouth based, and I still live down there to this day. And I definitely fell in love with the place. I mean, it's just windy all the time. It's just a big playground for any kind of water sports. So 17-year-old with full freedom and a car, it was kind of the dream. Exploring the south coast and Devon. But yeah, so no, I moved away from home when I was 16, 17. And then just yeah, continued that path really.
And then you were one of the crew. I remember it well because I was in the kite racing scene back then, and there was all this talk of, kite racing was kind of growing, but windsurfing was still the Olympic sport, and there was a big push to try and get kite surfing into the Olympics, and that was the sort of buzzword at the time. And I remember in the UK there was kind of a ragtag bunch of kite racers that would meet up about 10 times a year at various events to do a bit of kite racing. You had people like the Bridges who were a little bit more professional, and everyone else was just a bit more of a sort of weekend warrior, just meeting up for a few beers and having a crack around a race course. But was that your first experience of kite surfing when windsurfing was sort of kicked out and kite surfing was in, and then there was that period, wasn't there, where it kind of kicked backwards and forwards and changed? Was
Yeah.
that the first time that you got underneath a kite?
Yeah, so I had no interest in kiting. I mean, I think as most windsurfers will admit, you've got the kite surfing, windsurfing rift, and back in
Yeah.
those days, you never ever crossed that line. You were one or the other, and you never did both. And so I'm not ashamed to say I was very much of kite surfing is such an awful sport. Why would we do that? Windsurfing is so much better. But yeah, so I was part of that switch over in 2012. And so learned how to flipped over, learned how to kite surf, did some lessons down in Edge. I kind of got into that, and then obviously we ended up doing the World Championships, and I think we did a couple more events that year as well. Some in France, and we ended up doing the World Championships in October on the three fin race boards, and it was really cool. That was an amazing summer, learning a new sport and everything else. And weirdly for me, that was pretty much the beginning of the end of my windsurfing career mentally. I've completely fell in love with kiting, and so kind of to go back to a sport which was slower, a bit more boring, way more physical in terms of the fitness levels that you had to be on an RSX at that time, and a lot lighter. 6'4", I had to be constantly dieting, and the beauty of the kite racing is that you didn't have to. You could be a bit heavier, a bit more kind of natural weight for me, which is a big kind of push. And oddly enough, actually, the year I left windsurfing was my most successful year. So it was the first time I'd broken into the top 10 at an international level, and I just wasn't enjoying it. And so I was 21 in I think it was 2014, and I kind of stepped away and said, you know what, actually this isn't for me. Nick Dempsey was still dominant, and I didn't see any way of catching or overtaking him until he retired. And as it happened, no one did until he retired after 2016. And then obviously Tom Squires went to 2020, sorry. And so it was kind of a natural end for me, and I think just almost opening my eyes a little bit to what else was out there. And I've kind of been involved in the kite industry, whether it's working in it or coaching it or racing in it ever since. So actually it was kind of, at the time it felt like the end of the world, and now looking back on it, it completely changed the trajectory of my life really, and I would definitely wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now if that hadn't happened. But at the time it felt like the end of our worlds, of just how could they possibly do this to us? But no, it was to be honest the best thing that could have ever happened to me. So which is really cool.
Yeah, I remember it well, and it was kind of from a kite surfer's perspective, and I used to windsurf as well, so a little bit like yourself. I started when I was 7 years old. My dad taught me, and stood around and did that, and I love windsurfing and got into kiting in 2000. When it first started, and that kind of transformed my life, and I ended up where I am now. But I remember that period, and it was interesting. I remember the kite races of the UK were sort of a bit nose out of joint. How are these windsurfers going to learn to kite race? We've been doing it for ages, and we're really skilled at it, and we know what we're doing, and it's really technical, and it's really hard. And of course, I think we had that like an Olympic sort of, it wasn't a qualifier, what do they call it in the UK? It was just
National
sort of an
ranker.
event where, yeah, national ranker, that's the word. So the national ranker event, and it was down in Weymouth, and I remember you guys had been off like learning to kite for sort of about 6 months or something. It didn't feel like it was very long, and we were like, they're going to get absolutely toasted, but it was surprising how good you'd all got. And I think that was the end of my kite surfing race career, because I pretty much, that was the last event I did. I did that event, and I was like, no, this is not for the people that are just taking the piss and turning up for beers anymore. This has suddenly become a serious sport, because these guys are out there doing it day in, day out, and really training for it. So it was an interesting period, that's for sure. And I guess for you, that's a large part of your career, because obviously you went on, you had some amazing results, you did really, really well, and then ended up making it all the way to the Olympics as well.
Yeah. I mean, I think the national rankers were. I mean, oddly enough, I started avoiding them like the plague for the last few years, because they got later and later in the year, to the point where we were doing them in November, and there's much nicer places to be than the UK in November. But yeah, I mean, it was amazing, and I remember still, that summer, I still have very fond memories of it. Me and Tom were living in our vans off Weymouth Beach, and we were doing 6 to 8 hours every single day on the water, and learning new things every single day, crashing. I think by the end of that summer, the minor injuries unit on Portland knew us by name, because we just had so many injuries, being stitched up, every other week from fins going through or kite lines or anything else. But yeah, I think it was such a transition from being so focused in the racing and the Olympic world to then all of a sudden being part of that group where having beers on postponements was a normal thing to do, and at the end of the day, the first thing you reached for was a beer, not a foam roller and not a stretching mat. And I think that was actually quite refreshing for all of us. I think because all of us had kind of been on that RIA kind of treadmill since we were, God knows, 12 or something, maybe some of us even younger. And so actually, it was a really nice experience to be like, oh, actually, But then I think, the flip side of that, we kind of ruined the sport as well, because then we made it really serious, because everyone realised they actually had to train and not drink beers and actually look after themselves to be successful. And I think that was where, I mean, that was definitely the beginning of that pivotal moment for the sport, where it started getting more serious.
Started to get really professional. And then when was it? Because I remember it was the three fin race boards was the big thing at the time. And then when did you transition into the foiling side of it? Because kite foiling is a pretty, probably I think kite foiling is the hardest foiling discipline to do, and to do well, because obviously you've got to learn to kite. That's not easy. And then you've got to learn to foil, which is also not easy. And on a kite foil board, it's really small, and it's very easy to go over the handlebars, unlike on a windsurfing foil board where you can touch down nice and gently, and you've got a big nose in front of you to make it a little bit easier. And then I think wing foiling is probably the easiest way to access it. So how was it for you transitioning from riding those big race boards to sort of switching to foiling? How did that go?
Yeah, really difficult. And I think actually it's funny, I think if we jumped back on the foils that we all learnt on, the original group of us who learned how to kite foil, I think if we jumped on the foils back then, we'd still struggle to use them, because they were, so hard to use, especially the first race foils. And I had the first foil I bought off Callum Edge. It was an old Agera, which is now obviously Go Foil set up, and it was terrible. I mean, it was cutting edge at the time, but it was terrible. It was a massive board. Mast was super wobbly. The connections were horrific. I think everything screwed together with one screw, which God knows how it didn't fall apart on my first session. And so I kind of, I was very much, I think, from my windsurfing days and from enjoying having that feeling of, almost the pitter patter across the water of the going fast, I was quite not against foiling, but I didn't necessarily see its place. And I think in those very early days, the kite race board was pretty much the same speed as the foils, because the foils hadn't really developed. And you could see that eventually they would get faster, but definitely the first year there was no, they were the same. I think when it got a little bit choppy, the foil was a little bit faster. But so yeah, it was quite an uphill battle for sure. I mean, and learning on tube kites is obviously not easy either. And so my first experiences were on tube kites and then quickly onto the foil kites, but lots of swims in Weymouth Harbour. Like that was kind of the new norm as we were going in lighter winds and smaller kites. And suddenly we were never using the 18 meter. We'd only use a 15 meter, whereas on the race board you'd always be super powered because you didn't need as much wind and stuff like that. So yeah, it was tricky for sure. And like, I think I was a very relatively early adopter. Obviously you've got the Bridges who were always early adopters to everything, that every new sport that comes along. But yeah, pretty early adoption of that. But as I said, I still loved racing the race boards, and even when people had started racing foils, I was a bit later to the scene. I was a good kind of maybe 2 years, year and a half later to that kind of transition into the foil racing, because I was very much kind of had not committed, but in my head, I thought that the race boards were going to stick around. Just the fact that it was a bit safer. In those days, the foils were super dangerous. Everyone was crashing all over the place. But obviously now, looking back at it, as soon as the kites improved, foiling just completely took off. And that's kind of obviously completely shaped racing from there on in terms of in the kite world, which it's amazing. But yeah, I definitely was a later adopter to the racing side of things than maybe I should have been.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you say that about the pitter patter of the board across the water, because that was one thing I loved about those old kite race boards, was they felt so fast because you were just hammering across the water in hardly any wind, and it sort of felt like windsurfing, because you had a board that was being used in the same way a windsurfing board was. You're out on the rails of it, you weren't edging it, you were driving off the fins, but you had the efficiency of a kite. So I love that feeling so much so I nostalgically bought a Temavento a little while back, thinking that I would use it, and it sat in the garage for ages and never got used. And then I think it's sitting gave it to someone to turn into a wingboard eventually. I was like, that was a bit of nostalgia. It's probably never going to happen, but perhaps it's a shame that that's an area of kite surfing that's not been explored a little bit more. And then how was the road to the Olympics? I mean, that was obviously a huge part of your life in terms of dedication, but I know it was sort of touch and go there for actually qualifying, but you ended up doing really well. How was that kind of last couple of years leading up to that? What was the training regime like, and was it hard on your body? I know a lot of riders were having to adapt quite a lot, and the equipment was changing an awful lot too. You had to be on the fastest gear as well. So how was it keeping up to date with that, keeping on top of it, and making sure you're in the best possible shape for 2024?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say that my Olympic run-up was very much far from ideal, in most senses of the word. I mean, I was on not the wrong gear, but I wasn't on the most competitive gear when the big shift to fly surfer happened. I was still very much heavily sponsored by F1. I'd helped develop that kite and was pretty committed and set to that kind of path with them. And then when the fly surfer kite became more dominant, I was late to that transition, mainly because I was so kind of invested and bought into F1 at the time. And I think we had a awful summer where I was being coached by Johnny Hutchcroft, and suddenly the fly surfer was dominant, and we had no idea what was going wrong. And I think this must be 2022, 2023, and no, sorry, 2022, and it was awful. We had a summer where we're like, oh, should we just retire? Am I actually just rubbish? Because it was really tough. I'd gone from dominating and being top 3 at events, running into the new cycle post COVID. We had the new gear and I was doing really, really well, to suddenly I was struggling, really struggling to even get into the top 10. And then, obviously then it kind of transpired that the fly surfers were the new dominant kite and we all needed to be transitioning onto them. And then just as that transition happened, I had a really bad crash in The Hague. Someone rode into the back of me in 2022, end of 2022, and completely ripped my MCL off. And so then I was kind of off the water for 3 months there. And that was kind of like the beginning of the trajectory that we were planning to go to the games. Obviously, the trials were the following year. Everything was kind of, the build up was happening, if you like. And suddenly I found myself off the water. Yeah, I was on crutches and in a brace, and was looking at doing my entire Olympic qualifying in a brace. And I actually did do the whole of 2023, where obviously me and Guy were competing of who was going to go to the games at the beginning of the year, and then later in the year
Yeah.
qualifying for the country to go to the games. And I did the whole thing in a brace, having just come back from grade 3 MCL injury only 3 months prior. And so that kind of was a bit of a whirlwind, to be honest. It was, I had no idea whether I was going to come back and be on good enough form to be in front of Guy. Guy had a really good winter's training and was pushing hard, and had kind of flipped the professional switch a bit harder than maybe he was doing in previous years, and was catching me up really, really quick towards the end of 2022, and then into 2023. It was a real concern. And I think the time away and the injury actually helped me quite a lot. We came back, I was way fresher, I was way more on it, and I ended up managing to kind of pretty dominate the beginning of the year. I podiumed at every event up until the end of the year. And Guy hung his hat up just before the test event, so I qualified for the Olympic test event, and Guy decided that was that he didn't want to continue pushing and continue competing, and so he kind of stepped away then. And then I had a complete nightmare, which was we turned up to the Olympic qualifier, so where you qualify the nation, which was the 2023 World Championships, and I got COVID 3 days before. And so I was absolutely bedridden. I could only just about get out of bed to do my equipment measurement. Had my coach and my caddy at the time basically carrying me down to the beach to get stuff. And this was the big one. This is, everyone had put all the pressure on. This was the thing that needed to happen. And day one of the regatta, and I kind of managed to just about get away with it. And then we were wearing the GoPros, and my coach would do the debrief afterwards based on the GoPro footage. And he was watching the GoPro footage, and he gave me a call and said, "How are you breathing throughout these races? Because you're coughing the majority of the way around." And I was just so ill, and it was awful. And it was this horrible thing where I'd been completely competitive the whole year, and then suddenly it was a disaster. And so I obviously didn't manage to qualify the nation there. It was absolute heartbreak. It was a nightmare. And then we went to the Europeans just after that, which was kind of only 3 weeks later. I was pretty unfit, wasn't particularly ready for it, but was like, okay, this should be a relatively easy competition to be able to qualify. And obviously it was in Portsmouth in the UK, so home crowd, everyone there, all of the investment that could possibly be there.
Yeah.
And last day of medal race, it all went wrong. I took the wrong kite out. I took an 11 meter when I should have been on a 15, and just didn't qualify. And so suddenly we went from it almost being a dead certain that I was going to be qualifying for the Olympics to, oh shit, we're kind of on the back foot a bit here. And so that changed everything that we did, and the whole kind of 23 and 24. And as you said, thankfully I came back really strong in the last chance regatta, as they decided to call it in April, and managed to qualify with more. Well, apart from after day one, I think it was straight firsts until the end of the regatta, bar one race. So definitely it kind of peaked up and was looking good. So it was a roller coaster, and then even 2024, we're running into 3 months before the Olympics, and I have a massive crash and put a foil into my shin bone. And so I snapped the trailing edge off into my shin, and had to have surgery in the south of France the day before the World Championships, and missed the World Championships. And that was 2.5 months before the Olympics. And so even then, I'm like, God, am I actually going to make it to this Olympics that I've been training so hard for 4 years? And what state am I going to be in when I do get there? So it was definitely not without its ups and downs and its adventures, it was definitely a difficult 4 years, but was worth it in the end.
How do you cope with some of those setbacks mentally? Because listening to them here, I obviously I followed them at the time, but they were probably like a little snippet on my radar of news that was
Right.
coming in that, oh, Connor's hurt himself, or, this has happened, or he's not qualified for that. But hearing you tell the story, how do you cope with that mentally to like keep your head in the game and still think positively that you can do this and you can make it, when you're heading into the last chance regatta and your back's up against the wall? How do you kind of do that?
Relatively badly is the honest answer. I mean, I definitely wasn't great mentally through it. As my sports psychologist and friends and physiotherapist will tell you, it was tough. I mean, I was, they were. Yeah, without the team around me, it wouldn't have happened. And I think that's the crux, I think, of my entire last 2 years of running up into the Olympics. Is I had a phenomenal, really tight support network that got me through those last 2 years. And my physio always joked about the fact that we were just holding me together to get to the games, and I could fall apart the day after, and which kind of happened. I finished the games and my body just went, "Yeah, cool. You've tried to hold me together for 2 years. I'm not doing this anymore." And it was kind of, yeah, we were just putting band-aids and on the whole time and getting through. And I think it was the same mentally. It was just, I think when you know that the finish line is getting closer, you bury a lot of the not the issues, but the things that you're having to deal with, and it just becomes a process. It's, I need to do this because it's only 3 months away now, or it's only 6 months away now, and it just, yeah, again, it just becomes a process. And I think that's where we kind of managed to get it through. Was right, we'll sort, it sounds really bad, but we'll sort the major problems out after the Olympics. We'll put your body back together after the Olympics. We'll get your head back into a better place after the Olympics. And I think that's how we got through it. Was, yeah, a really close team and a definite end goal. There was a definite line in the sand, which was, yeah, that will be the point where we can reset and start rebuilding. But it was definitely not easy.
And you're one of the very few humans on the planet that can call themselves an Olympian, which is a hell of an accolade. And I know that, perhaps didn't get the result that you wanted at 2024, but it's still an incredible experience. What was it like turning up to the opening ceremony as part of the Team GB?
Yeah, it was. I mean, the whole experience was amazing. Like, I think, and overwhelming. I think it's the first time that I saw sport in the limelight. I'm not a massive sports fan. I watch F1 religiously, but I never really watched team games in stadiums or anything like that. And the closing ceremony, for example, you're just there in this massive, fully packed out, every seat sold stadium, and you're doing a victory walk or whatever they want to call it around, and it's massive. It's pretty incredibly overwhelming in terms of that. And as you said, I mean, I think the hard bit for me is I was incredibly disappointed with my result. I was, it really was hard for me to accept that I'd been a podium finisher for 4 years, basically. I mean, there had been a few events that I stepped off the podium, but there really wasn't many events from kind of 2018 onwards, really, that I'd been off the podium. And so to then kind of get to that final point and be a little bit, well, effectively fall short from my expectations. And I think what I was capable of was really disappointing. And I think I actually booked a flight home the day after. So I had finished the regatta and I was like, I don't want to be here anymore. I want to forget the Olympics ever happened. I want to forget my result. I want to forget all of this, and I just want to get home. And I'd booked a flight, and then a few people had convinced me, just go to the closing ceremony. Go up to Paris. Obviously, we were down in Marseille. Go up to Paris, and you'll see what it's all about. And you'll actually see this infrastructure. We walked into the Olympic Village, and suddenly, I think it puts into perspective of sport. There's a higher percentage of people who were disappointed with their result than the percentage of people who were happy with their result. Obviously, there's less medals than there are people. And so I think that all put it into perspective
Yeah.
of, that is what it is. And, I think Mickey Beckett kind of said, which was really harsh of him to do at the time, because I was just about to walk and do the final media run after the medal race. And he saw me and was like, oh, I'm really sorry. Obviously, he was very disappointed with the result as well. And he said, don't allow one event every 4 years to portray what you are as an athlete and dictate what you are. And I kind of went, cool, was about to burst into tears anyway, mate. But now I'm going to do all these interviews with my sunglasses on. And so I did all the final
Yeah.
interviews with my sunglasses on. Like, can you take your sunglasses off? I was like, nope, not a chance. But it's, yeah, he was right. You know, we make the Olympics into a massive thing in our heads of just like this all-encompassing thing, and it is amazing. And God, the guys and girls who get gold medals and everything else in the different disciplines, it's incredible. But I think for me, it was important to remember it is just one event. It's one event every 4 years. That yes, it's amazing. Yes, it's what everyone's working for, but there's so much more to our sport and to every sport and to an athlete's life than that. But it didn't change the fact at the time it was pretty heartbreaking. Yeah, it was tough. It was tough.
Well, I mean, you're a hero to me. I mean, 8th at the Olympics in my book is pretty damn good. I know it's not a medal, but having done a lot of kite racing over the years and watched that whole Olympic journey. And I think as well, what you say there about it being the Olympics, I've never really, I totally understand why it's such an important event because it's watched the world over and it's huge, but I never really got the obsession with kite surfing wanting to be in the Olympics. I never really understood why it became almost like a defining moment of our sport that, until kite surfing's in the Olympics, it's not really an official sport. And now it almost feels like with the big air scene that's come along that, kite racing's not really something that most kiteboarders even think about anymore, even though it still goes on and it's still a huge part of the sport and it will still be, people striving to get into the Olympics with it. But yeah, I never really understood the huge obsession with it, in terms of it being so defining. But, I think hats off, Connie did incredibly well. Ellie's achievement was obviously incredible, and I really enjoyed cheering her on. And what I would say is, I'm sure that for Ellie, becoming a gold medalist at the Olympics has transformed her life. Do you feel that it transformed your life in any way, just being part of it? Did it have an effect? Did it kind of put your name out there in places that you didn't think it would? Or was, getting a result that you were disappointed in kind of like knocking it for six a little bit?
Yeah, I think it definitely knocked for six. Like it was tough to accept that result, for sure. And yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think it's different. I think it's different for everyone as well. I think depending on how much you're on social media or how much you're promoting that, and I'm terrible at social media, always have been. I hate social media, so I've kind of always never really been great at promoting myself, in that sense. I think I used it as an experience personally to make sure it bettered myself in so many areas, and that's kind of where I moved on from. But yeah, in terms of the opportunities that have come about from it, I don't think it's any different to what I would have been doing anyway. I think that the experiences I have, I can now use in the areas of my life that I'm in at the moment, whether it's the design side of it, whether it's the coaching side of it, whether it's mentoring, whatever that might be. It's opened up avenues that for me to utilize. Has it necessarily increased my opportunities? No, I think it has just opened avenues that I can enter, that I, if I choose to, more than anything else. And I think the medals, definitely you'd have people looking for you rather than you having to look for things. I think definitely in the first kind of 6 to 8 months after the Olympics, and I think obviously Ellie was inundated. Obviously she went straight and did the Athena pathway stuff and moved on now and doing the SailGP stuff and all that stuff. So that definitely opened doors in that area. But for me, I don't think I was ever massively interested in that side of things. I was always more interested about the kite racing and doing well in the kite racing, and then moving on to whatever was next. And it was almost just a foundation, I guess, into what I'm now doing and what I wanted to do next, more than opening doors that I needed it to open. So I think it's different for everyone. I think it's completely different for everyone, and depending on the result and not depending on the result. I know people who didn't get the result and who it still opened huge doors, and now they're celebrities in their own country and doing loads of things, massive sponsorship deals and everything else. And I think it's just how you choose to use the experience more than anything. And I'm pretty rubbish at self-promotion and social media and any of the rest of it. So it was more just a personal thing that has helped me develop what I wanted to do rather than allow me to open doors in different areas.
Yeah. And I know you're working heavily with Ozone on designing at the moment. We mentioned it at the beginning, working on their wing program. I think was it. I may or may not be correct in my research that started with the Blue Fox boards when you started designing during COVID. Is that when a sort of interest in design started, or were you working with kite design before that?
So I was doing some of the development more than design before that. So I was working with F1 on the development of the Diablo, their race kite, but never designing. I think Robert, who was
Yeah,
the designer of F1 and still the designer of the F1 wings, he was really pushing me to try and get into the design side of things. But it never really came to light with F1. They didn't particularly see me as a future design prospect for whatever reason. I didn't live in Montpellier. I wasn't French, so the language barrier was always a bit more difficult.
yeah,
Um,
that's a big thing with them is you've got to be in
yeah,
Montpellier, right?
exactly. Yeah, so that kind of came to a natural end in terms of the design and development side of it. As much as I would have loved to continue working there, and then yeah, Blue Fox was born and created Blue Fox Blue Fox boards, which was great, and a big kind of change of pace for me and change of lifestyle, and actually gave me something else to do along with the kite racing side. And so I taught myself CAD. The first boards were kind of developed and designed, and then yeah, I hadn't really got into the kite design at that point. Obviously, it was very difficult. F1 weren't prepared to give me the software for me to learn the software. And so I was kind of learning bits and pieces from Robert whilst we were still developing different products, like the Target that eventually came out, their free ride foil kite. I helped with the initial development of that, but I'd never really managed to get my hands on the design software to be able to actually do anything with it. And then kind of a similar trend with Ozone is I joined Ozone, when me and F1 parted ways, I approached Ian Hannay and said, I'd really, really want to develop a race kite for 2028. I'd love to be involved in the Ozone side of things and see if they can get the R1 V5 to being competitive. And so I joined them in a kind of a similar structure, but a little bit different. I wasn't a team rider. I was just like almost a paid contractor. So I would come in on days and help the development on a daily
Yeah.
basis. With Axel, and Axel was kind of their team rider and the hub of all of that development process. And I would just come in and help with development, help with the tuning, help with the ideas, and then I kind of got more and more involved in that design work. Got much closer with Dom, who's the head R&D and designer at Ozone. And then that kind of followed into after the Olympics. We started having conversations about how I could join Ozone more full time. And about I think a month after the Olympics, Ian proposed that I come on board as an assistant designer. And that's kind of where it transformed. Me and Axel jumped on a flight. I think it was the 1st of September or something, so pretty close after the games. Jumped on a flight, flew to Mauritius, met the team, and within a week we were starting to design kites. And not really design kites, learn how to use the software to eventually design kites. But it was and that was kind of that transition, which was amazing. And I promise you that the first kites I designed only just about flew, so it was definitely nothing to write home about. But it was cool, and it was a cool transition to do, and it was like an amazing experience, and is an amazing experience. And that has then developed over the last year. So I've only been with Ozone kind of as an employee for just over a year now, and that kind of transitioned into what I do now, which is the wing design. It was an odd transition. Like I think when I joined Ozone, I was very set on wanting to design the kites, because that was kind of where my passion was. I hadn't really got massively into winging yet. Didn't really have the time. I was kite racing whenever I could, and was still loving the kite side of things, and hadn't really. I could wing okay, but I hadn't really got the love for it. And then I just transitioned into. I was a little bit better at the wing design than I was the kite design, just because of necessity more than anything else. Ozone, we were a little bit behind on our product releases, and so we needed a big push and a big kind of all the resources being devoted to that. We had the Fusion and the Flux, which were both late to being released, and we really needed them on the market, and so I helped with that kind of the final transition, taking those from prototypes to production. And then for after that, Dom said, okay, we want to hand over the reins to you for all of the wing development going forward. And so that's kind of what I've been doing for the last 3-4 months. My first major release will be in two months' time, which will be kind of all off my own bat, which is a bit nerve-wracking, but again, it's kind of
Yeah.
exactly what I've always wanted to do. So it's also pretty cool. That product will be succeed. Whether it's a success or whether it's a failure will be me, and that's exactly what I wanted to do from a long time. And it's pretty cool. It's pretty amazing job, I have to say.
It's a big responsibility, something like that, isn't it? And I know from whenever you put something out into the public space, which we do an awful lot, you get feedback on it, and so it's you're wearing your heart on your sleeve, right? You can't hide from the results, so you've got to make sure you put the work in to make sure you get the results that you want. So before we really dive into the design stuff, because it's something I really do want to chat about, how did winging come along, and when did that passion start? Because you started as a windsurfer, then you went full blown kiting, and were fully focused on that to a level which is extreme, really, by most people's standards, to be able to make it all the way to the Olympics. And then now you pretty much just wing foil all the time. Where did that addiction come from, and how did that start?
Honestly, it's the winging addiction has actually come around pretty recently. Actually the beginning of this year. As I said, I could wing. I was enjoying winging. I don't think I necessarily loved winging. Combination of reasons. At 105 kilos, which is what we are for kite racing, winging is actually pretty rubbish because you've got to use a massive board, massive foil. Kind of, it's just everything's a bit cumbersome compared to kite racing or kite surfing, where I can chuck up a same size kite as everyone else, the same board, and just go. I think so. There's a few kind of transitions. The first one was I love designing, and I think the passion for designing almost overrode the dislike for all the little bits of the sport. And then I developed or I designed a new board which was a bit more custom for me, so it was kind of into that mid-length area, and I got a board built which then meant that I could actually enjoy winging a bit more. And I got back into my Mike's Lab wing foils. I mean, me and Mike's Lab have a very long history. I helped develop the kite foils from years and years and years ago, before it went Olympic. And beginning of the year, I picked up the phone to Stefano and Mike and said, can I have some, how can I have some wing foils, and actually getting onto good foils again, and foils that feel fast and fun and playful and stiff, and they're proper foils, if you like. That it's not your commercial foils. They're got everything from the racing kind of pedigree in a foil that are maybe sometimes too much for your everyday customer, but when it's super stiffness, it's one piece, so traveling with them is a nightmare and all of this. But that definitely was a big shift for me of right now I'm actually enjoying what's underneath my feet rather than having production stuff, which I was really not massively enjoying. And then it really was actually the designing side of it. I love designing, like it's such a passion of mine. And so actually getting prototypes that I developed, getting prototypes that I'd even had a little bit of input into, which I wasn't fully designing prototypes at the beginning of the year. I was just inputting into them, or even just finishing the files for them. But that was, again, it was wearing your heart on your sleeve. It was that pride thing of, right, I've done that. I need to make sure that's good enough, or I need to test that, or I need to make sure it's this or that or everything else. And that's kind of where that passion started from, was probably actually just the beginning of the year of that kind of the real passion that moved away from kiting. And as I said, I've hardly picked up a tube kite since. Obviously, I was still competing and still racing until recently, but I've hardly tube kited. I've every opportunity I wing now. In Mauritius, I've been out here for 3 weeks now. One eye's been going off, and I've still I go winging every day, which is it's cool. And I think again, it's I also knew that I needed to be better at winging. I think that was the big one for me. Is I treated it as a bit of not a training camp, but a bit of training to go, okay, I need to be better at testing these products so that my input is more valuable and that my design work is better. So I kind of, threw myself into it as I would a race program of, right, I need to improve myself quickly here so that the input I'm doing, the feedback I'm doing, and therefore the products I'm releasing are good enough. And so that was a shift. And I think once you get good at a sport and or better at a sport, you also start enjoying it more because you can go out in bigger waves and everything else. So yeah, I think that was it's been this year basically.
Yeah, so it's kind of a fresh thing. It's interesting. It's definitely, I think you hit a nail on the head there with equipment because, I sort of started winging. I think I had a go when Nash first released the windsurfer, which was in 2019 in Tarifa when Robbie was there, sort of, showcasing the sport. And I kind of had a go at it and was like, oh yeah, I can kind of see a bit of potential, but didn't really see where it fit in with kite surfing. And then I was on an F1 trip in Madagascar and had another go at it. And it was, the F1 guys, right? They're the complete opposite of you. They're all about 60 kilos. I'm sort of 90 in a wetsuit. And the wing gear that they had was all tiny. It's like 60-litre boards and I'm 90 kilos and it's my second ever go at winging. So it's just not going to go. I was just like, this sport doesn't quite make sense. And then when I learned, it was obviously on bigger kit, which was great, but then it becomes cumbersome and you kind of like, oh, this isn't actually a lot of fun anymore. And I sort of switched back to kiting. And then more recently, as the kit's got better, like the mid-length boards, and you can have a board that's still quite fast and dynamic, and some new foils that have come out as well recently that we've been testing have been, really eye-opening. And suddenly it's like, oh, winging's, up there as being as enjoyable as kite surfing is. So yeah, I think you're spot on with the kit making a big difference into people's enjoyment of it. And yeah, that's what sort of certainly rehooked me back into it again, that's for sure. And with the designing, are you totally self-taught on that? I know Ozone use OzCAD, which is their own software. So have you been, just teaching yourself and learning it yourself, or have you had any help from the designers there, like Dom and people
Oh
like
no,
that?
I
Have they
mean,
been helping you
I
along the
think
way?
learning Rhino was great. Like originally when I was learning CAD, because it's all YouTube, so you just open a YouTube channel on one screen and on the other screen you just start teaching yourself. Whereas OzCAD, there's no lessons. So we used what the first kind of 2 months we were here, we would joke, me and Axel would have morning school with Dom. So we'd go over to Dom's house, which is kind of half a mile down the road, and we'd sit there like school kids, with him teaching us how to use the software. And it was from scratch. It's like the first things we were doing was scaling up and scaling down kites. So for production, he would make a 9 meter, and then me and Axel would scale it up and down, get it completely wrong. Have leading edges twice the size of what they should have been, and struts that didn't actually fit into leading edges, and after all sorts. And even now, I still make mistakes. I still pick up the phone to Dom and go, where do I find this random number on this random bit of software that has no reason or rhyme or anything? And it's really tricky. The biggest difference is working with soft fabrics, which is something I've never done before. Obviously, all of the board design, what generally speaking, apart from shrinkage and stretch of carbon, you press print and you kind of get what you've designed to a certain extent. Whereas in kite and wing design, there's so many parameters of material, of how that's reacting with each other, how it's being stitched, how all of this is working together, that the software and how you design has so many layers to it. So you change one thing, it changes 5 other things, which is the same in any kind of design work, but it's amplified in fabric work, especially with anything that you're trying to put tension into. So that was the biggest learning experience. Was in my head, I was like, well, I'm going to change this and change that and change that, and it's just going to do that. It's not going to change anything else. And then all of a sudden, I'm looking at kites and wings that I've designed and gone, well, that looks nothing like what it should have looked like. And that's because one number was wrong on, down in a sub menu that I'd never even looked at before. And that's kind of the biggest learning. And learning OzCAD has been tough, and but Dom was great with it and has helped massively, and I got caught up with it pretty quickly, which is why I can now run my own projects, which is something that I wasn't particularly expecting to do from the outset. And we still use Rhino, so when we export all of the files from OzCAD, and then you get like the flat sheets, and then we do the final editing in Rhino. So my Rhino experience definitely helped with that. And I think that the amazing thing with Ozone is that because they own their own factory, everything is so much easier and so much quicker. And that definitely can't be understated. And I think when you look at a lot of the Ozone products and you go, wow, how have they managed to, get that stitch just right in that tiny little section? That means that everything fits together perfectly, or why is it so clean? You know, Ozone has always been known as quite a high-end kind of product in terms of the factory finish. And that's just massively down to the factory. I mean, obviously the design work has a massive thing to do with it, but because we can be so adaptable with the factory, you know, I have countless emails every single day from the factory going backwards and forwards to try and perfect the little things. But it means that that feedback loop is really quick, which you don't get with a lot of other design works, which means that we can reduce how many prototypes we do. We don't do anywhere near as many, we don't need to do anywhere near as many prototypes as, say, duotone or F1, because every prototype we do can be adapted so much quicker in that design process and with that in that build process. But yeah, it was tough. And I think moving into the winging side of things, it's also because it's our own software, we can adapt the software to what we want it to look like. So we have a software designer in house, Stu, who lives in Norway, and we're continuously getting him to change the software to better suit our needs. And I think with winging being so new, the software has been developed massively over the last 6 months with us working on it. And so all of that's changing as well. So the software that I learned 12 months ago is not the same as the software I learned I'm using now. So yeah, it's been tough, but it's been amazing. Like, it has really genuinely been amazing to learn another software, and also again just to see your products actually in front of you, and you're like, wow, I actually designed that, whether it's good or bad or anything else. I designed that, I finished it, I completed it, and I can now go on the water and ride it. But no, it was definitely not self-taught. OzCAD was very much head teacher Dom was there the whole way, holding our hands.
Yeah, and it's pretty impressive what Ozone do as a company. You know, we've worked with them for a long time, and you know, whenever we get a kite on test from Ozone or a wing on test from Ozone, you know, we've just been testing the Flux V2s, and you know, they're really impressive. All the stitching is so good. You know, on the Alula versions, it's some of the best stitching that we'll see from any of the brands. You know, and it's just a testament to that factory. Have you been able to get out there and visit the factory much whilst you've been developing the products?
No, I haven't been out yet. We fly out in 2 days for Parapex's 25th birthday. So it's 25 years of Parapex on Saturday. And so, yeah, me and Axel are flying out there in 2 days' time to do that party. And then we're staying on a little bit and longer. And I'm working with the factory on a few wing bits for some of next year's wing releases to get those done. But it's fascinating because it's going to be really cool meeting everyone, because I know everyone on email. So I have, as I said, God knows how many emails every single day backwards and forwards with these guys developing the products, and they're sending me photos, and I'm saying, can you change this by a millimeter, that by a millimeter? And so part of it is going to them and going, I am so sorry for how rubbish some of those designs have been, and I'm so sorry for how useless some of my emails have been. So I'm definitely going to owe the guys a few beers at the party on Saturday.
That's great. It is an impressive business they've got running there with so many staff, and I know that Ozone really look after them as well, and put a lot of effort into it. What's your plans moving forwards? You're currently out in Mauritius. You're off to Vietnam, obviously, to the Parapex factory. What's the next 2026 looking like? Are you going to base yourself more in Mauritius, or are you going to be back in the UK a little bit? What's your plans?
A bit of everything. I think we're trying to spend at least 4 months out in Mauritius a year, kind of in two-month trips. I think it's so important for us as a design team to be in the same place for extended periods, because we all do all the sports, so we can all help and have input on the kites, the power wings, the wings, and everything else. And I think that's the really strong thing about the team right now, is there's now 4 or 5 of us out here who can all have input into those things, who can all design. And so everyone's kind of helping each other and pinging ideas off each other. And then, yeah, I'm actually, next year, I'm going to spend as much time as I can in the UK. I've spent 4 years where I've basically spent no time at all in the UK. I think, 2023, 2024, I didn't spend much more than 4 or 5 weeks in the UK a year. And so next year I'm going to really try and actually have a bit of a base and then do some test trips from there. But yeah, I think we're going to do an AWSI trip again, and probably head out to Hood River for a little bit longer as well. Obviously, with the surge of power wings and wings, it's an amazing place to test those. And so, yeah, I think just basing myself out of the UK, but then actually being able to explore some cooler places with test trips, and also I'm going to get back into my coaching, which I'm really excited about as well. So yeah, it's something that I did a lot of after I finished with windsurfing. I did kind of 4 or 5 years of coaching, and absolutely loved it. And so I'm actually really excited to get back into that world and actually give back what I've learned and all of the experience that I've had, and put that back into the sport. And TBC, where I'm going to be coaching, and who for yet, that's kind of still conversations going on in the background. But yes, I'm really excited about what 2026 is going to bring.
Awesome. That's great. Connor, I know you're a busy man, and we managed to slot this in at sort of fairly short notice. So I'm going to say thank you for that. That was really interesting to have a catch up. Thanks for the amazing insight into all the kite racing and the Olympics, but more so the design side of things as well. I'm excited because I'm a big fan of the Ozone wings and what they've been producing. So I'm excited to see what's coming out in a couple of weeks. I think I know, but we won't mention it because then I won't be able to release this podcast for 2 weeks. But thank you, Connor. Thanks for your time. That's been great.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
And there we have it. I'm sure you'll agree Connor's an interesting chap. It was really good to chat to him. I really enjoyed it. Hopefully you did too. Thank you again to our diamond sponsors, Armstrong, Cabrina, Core and Ozone. And keep your ears out next week for another episode. We've got a bunch of these recorded, so we're going to be aiming to get them out to you on a weekly basis.